Everyone's been watching the wrong relationship. For months, the story has been Charles and Harry, the estrangement, the memoir, the reunion nobody thought would happen. But according to people who actually know this family, that's not where the real tension sits. The son who stayed, who did everything right, who spent his whole life preparing to take the crown. That relationship isn't warm either. It's just quiet enough that nobody's been asking about it. Royal biographer Hugo Vickers put it about as plainly as anyone has. Asked about the relationship between King Charles and his heir, Vickers didn't reach for diplomatic language. The problem with William is that he thinks he knows best, he told Page 6. That's not a line about betrayal or estrangement. It's something quieter, and in some ways more uncomfortable. A father and son who function together, who show up together, who are civil to each other at every public turn, but who don't actually seem close. Royal writer Robert Jobson backed up the same picture, describing real differences of opinion between them over the past couple of years. Not a rupture, not a headline-grabbing falling out. Just distance, managed carefully, by two men who both understand exactly what's at stake if they let it show. What's actually driving that distance isn't really about personality clashes over small things, it's structural. Jobson was direct about why civility has to hold no matter what. William has to rise above it all if he's going to be king, and both he and Charles know they have to work together. That's a strikingly practical way to describe a father-son relationship, not built on closeness, but on necessity. William isn't just waiting in line for a job. Charles's decisions as monarch, who gets which title, who represents the family where, how the institution responds to crisis, directly shape the throne William is going to inherit. Every choice Charles makes now becomes William's inheritance later, for better or worse. That gives the relationship a strange asymmetry most families never had to deal with. You can be frustrated with a parent and still just avoid them for a while. William doesn't get that option. He has to stay close enough to stay informed, agreeable enough to stay useful, and patient enough not to look like he's angling for the job early. And then there's the detail Jobson added almost as an aside, which actually says more than it seems to at first. William, he explained, is on a higher plane as heir. That's not a throwaway compliment. It's a description of hierarchy inside the family itself. William isn't simply Charles's son the way Harry technically still is. He's the next occupant of the job Charles currently holds, which puts him in a category of his own, separate even from his own brother. That kind of positioning doesn't really leave room for an ordinary father-son dynamic. It leaves room for something more like a handover in progress, respectful, functional, and, according to the people who know them both, not especially warm. If there's one moment that actually tested whether this relationship could hold under real pressure, it wasn't a private disagreement behind palace doors. It was the collapse of Prince Andrew's standing inside the family, playing out in full public view. The pressure had been building for years, but it reached a breaking point in October 2025, when fresh revelations tied to Jeffrey Epstein's late accuser Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir made Andrew's position untenable. On October 30, 2025, Buckingham Palace confirmed that King Charles had formally stripped his younger brother of every title and honor he held, including the one he'd carried since birth, Prince. Andrew would be known from that point on simply as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. He was also forced out of Royal Lodge, his 30-room home near Windsor Castle. Then, on February 19, 2026, months after losing his titles, Andrew was arrested by Thames Valley Police on suspicion of misconduct in public office, tied to his dealings with Epstein while serving as a UK trade envoy. William wasn't a passive observer through any of this. According to Kensington Palace sourcing reported by The Telegraph, William was fully supportive of how his father handled the fallout, and other reporting has described him as directly involved in the decision-making that led to stripping Andrew's titles, not just informed after the fact, but actively part of the process. That distinction matters. This wasn't Charles making a hard call alone and William simply going along with it out of loyalty. It was two men, father and son, making a defining decision about the future of the institution together, in real time, under enormous public pressure. And according to people close to the family, that shared experience did something a lot of ordinary family closeness never manages to do. It didn't make them warmer with each other, but it made them more unified. When the house needed to be put in order, they put it in order together. That's not affection. But inside this particular family, it might be the closest thing to trust that actually gets tested and proven. Royal expert Russell Myers, in his new biography William and Catherine, The Monarchy's New Era, goes further than anyone else has in actually naming what's brought Charles and William closer together, and it isn't sentiment. Myers writes plainly that Charles and William had been united throughout the Sussexes' departure from the UK and the royal family and the scandal involving Prince Andrew and his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, which has brought them ever closer together in recent years. Read that sentence carefully and it says something quietly significant. The bond between them wasn't built during birthdays, holidays, or quiet family time. It was built during two of the most damaging crises the monarchy has faced in a generation. Adversity did what ordinary closeness couldn't. A source who spoke to Myers for the book put it even more directly, and in a way that carefully avoids playing favorites. While the king loves both his sons equally, his relationship with the Prince of Wales is something that has strengthened over the period of difficulty experienced by the family as external battles have occurred. Notice the specific phrasing there, strengthened through difficulty, not through connection for its own sake. It's not a claim that Charles loves William more than Harry. It's a claim that circumstance, not affection, is what's been doing the work of pulling father and heir together. When the Sussexes stepped back from royal life, when Andrew's scandal threatened to swallow the institution's credibility whole, Charles and William were the two people left standing at the center of it, having to make decisions no one else in the family was positioned to make. That's not a relationship built on being close. It's a relationship built on being needed by each other at exactly the same moments, over and over again. There's an important distinction Jobson draws that keeps this story from collapsing into a simple which brother is closer to dad narrative. William, he explained, understands he and his brother have different agendas and they have a different relationship with Charles. That's a careful way of saying the two sons were never on the same track to begin with, and expecting William's bond with Charles to mirror Harry's, or vice versa, was probably always the wrong lens. Harry left the institution. William is inheriting it. Those are fundamentally different relationships to the same father, shaped by fundamentally different stakes. It's worth remembering where some of that difference actually started. Back in 2021, in his Apple TV Plus series The Me You Can't See, Harry described a specific pattern from his own upbringing, telling Oprah Winfrey that Charles used to tell him, "Well, it was like that for me, so it's going to be like that for you." Harry pushed back hard on that logic in the interview, saying that suffering yourself doesn't justify passing it on to your children, that if anything, it should motivate you to do the opposite for them. That's Harry's account of his own experience, offered in his own words, not a confirmed description of who Charles is as a father. But it's useful context here, because it shows that emotional distance from Charles isn't a new theme invented for this story. Harry was describing something along these lines years before the memoir, years before the Netflix series, years before any of the very public fallout that followed. And despite everything that's happened since, despite Charles's own recent effort to rebuild some bridge with Harry, including the Highgrove reunion with his grandchildren on July 10, 2026, the first time he'd seen Archie and Lilibet in 4 years, Jobson doesn't think William's position is moving anywhere. "I'm sure he is not in any way going to reconcile with Harry," Jobson said. "He's made his position pretty clear. They have different paths." So even as one relationship in this family shows small signs of thawing, the other, according to people who watch this family closely, is staying exactly where it's been. Charles can extend an olive branch to one son without it meaning anything for how the other two brothers see each other. So if William really does think he knows best, as Vickers put it, the question worth sitting with isn't whether that makes him a difficult son. It's whether that same instinct might make him a genuinely effective king. Vickers didn't leave that thought hanging as a criticism. He came back around to something closer to cautious optimism. We should give him a chance. He might make a super king. That's a notable thing for a royal biographer to say about someone he's just described as believing he knows better than everyone around him. But it points to something real about how monarchies actually function. A king who defers to everyone, who avoids ever pushing back on his father's decisions, who waits patiently for permission at every turn. That's not necessarily what keeps an institution stable during a crisis. Sometimes what a crisis actually needs is someone willing to say what he thinks, even to the king himself, and to act decisively when the moment calls for it. That's arguably exactly what happened with Andrew. William didn't hang back. He engaged, he pushed, and by most accounts, he helped shape one of the most consequential decisions the monarchy has made in years. There's a version of this story where a cold or merely civil relationship between a king and his heir reads as a family tragedy, two people who should be close, who simply aren't, quietly disappointing each other in private. But there's another version, and it might be the more accurate one for this particular family, where that distance isn't a failure at all. It's what functional succession actually looks like when the stakes are this high. Charles and William don't need to be warm with each other to run this institution well. They need to trust each other's judgment, show up unified when it counts, and let the rest sort itself out quietly, off camera. By that measure, Whatever this relationship lacks in closeness, it may be making up for in something the monarchy needs a lot more right now: reliability. So maybe the Real story was never about warmth at all. Harry got the headlines because estrangement makes for a dramatic story: the exile, the memoir, the tearful reunion. William got overlooked because his story doesn't have any of that. No blow-up, no walkout, no public reckoning. Just two men who've learned, crisis after crisis, how to stand next to each other and make hard calls without needing affection to get there. That might not sound like much of a relationship, but inside a family whose entire job is holding a country together, it might be exactly the kind of relationship that lasts.